The sound of the front door creaking open echoed through the small, dimly lit house. A child, no older than 10, stood at the window, peering out with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Their eyes darted between the empty street and the empty room behind them. The room that once smelled of fresh flowers, their mother's favorite scent, now carried only the weight of silence. "Mom, when are you coming back?" the child whispered to the shadows, a question asked countless times but never answered. It had been 2 weeks since their mother left. No note, no explanation, just an empty house, a missing woman, and a child too young to understand. The child's world, once filled with warmth and laughter, had suddenly turned cold and quiet. The radio no longer played the soft songs their mother loved, and the kitchen was no longer alive with the clinking of pots and the scent of dinner being prepared. Instead, there was only silence. The child had tried asking their aunt, who had taken them in since their mother's departure, but her answers were always vague. "Your mother is, well, she's gone on a long journey," was all Aunt Simi ever said. "She'll be back soon, just wait." But the child couldn't wait anymore. They couldn't sit in that empty room and pretend everything was normal. They needed answers. One afternoon, while Aunt Simi was busy in the kitchen, the child decided to look for their mother. They began searching the house, turning over old papers, peering into forgotten corners, even opening drawers that had been closed for years. It wasn't much, but they found one thing, an old photo album tucked away beneath the bed. As they flipped through the pages, they came across a photo of their mother standing beside a man the child didn't recognize. His face was blurry, but the expression in their mother's eyes was clear, a mixture of fear and sadness. Suddenly, the child heard Aunt Simi's voice calling from the kitchen. "Come here, child," Aunt Simi called, her voice sharp. The child hesitated, but then stuffed the album into their backpack. They had to find out who that man was and why their mother's eyes had looked so different. That night, as the moonlight filtered through the bedroom window, the child lay awake, clutching the old photo album. Aunt Simi had finally gone to bed, and the house was wrapped in silence. Carefully, the child opened the album again, turning to the photograph of their mother, standing beside the unknown man. This time, they examined every detail, her hesitant smile, the faint shadow behind the man, and the distant look in her eyes. "Who are you?" the child murmured, staring at the man's face. The next day, the child walked to school with the photo album hidden in their backpack. They couldn't shake the feeling that this picture was the key to understanding why their mother had left. During recess, they sneaked away to a quiet corner of the schoolyard and opened the album, determined to piece together the mystery. Just then, a classmate named Tayo, who was known for having an interest in village gossip, noticed the child holding the photo. "Hey, what's that?" Tayo asked, curious. "It's a picture of my mother," the child replied hesitantly, quickly closing the album. "Let me see," Tayo insisted, grabbing at the album. Reluctantly, the child opened to the photograph, showing Tayo the man next to their mother. Tayo's eyes widened. "I know him. He used to live in this village a long time ago. They say he left one night and never came back." The child's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know his name?" they asked, their voice barely a whisper. Tayo shook his head. "No, but my grandma might. She knows everything about people from the village." Later that evening, the child couldn't get Tayo's words out of their mind. Who was the mysterious man, and why did their mother look so sad in the photo? That night, after Aunt Simi fell asleep, the child crept out of the house, determined to find answers. They made their way to Tayo's house, hoping his grandmother would still be awake. As they approached, the child saw a flicker of candlelight from the window. Tayo's grandmother sat alone, mumbling softly to herself as she stirred something in a pot over the fire. The child knocked softly on the door, and after a pause, Tayo's grandmother looked up, her wrinkled face turning curious when she saw who was standing there. She waved the child in. "Come in, little one. What brings you here at this hour?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. The child pulled out the photo, their hands trembling. "Do you know this man?" The old woman squinted at the picture for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Ah, yes, I remember him. He was close to your mother once. A strange man, that one. Not from our village. He came and went like the wind." "Why did he leave?" the child asked, leaning forward, hungry for answers. The old woman's eyes darkened. That is a question better left unanswered, child. Some things are hidden for a reason. But the child felt a deep urge to know. They wanted to understand why their mother would leave them behind. They pressed further. Please, I need to know why he left, why my mother left. The old woman sighed, then looked the child directly in the eyes, her expression shifting to one of grave seriousness. If you wish to know the truth, remember, some answers bring only sorrow. The child's mind raced as they left Tayo's grandmother's house, her warning echoing in their ears. Some answers bring only sorrow. But the more they thought about it, the more desperate they became for the truth. Who was this man, and what did he have to do with their mother's disappearance? The next morning, the child waited for Aunt Simi to leave for the market. The moment she was gone, they rushed back to their mother's room, the room they hadn't been allowed to enter since she left. The bed was neatly made, and the air smelled stale, as if no one had been there in weeks. The child went straight to the wardrobe, searching through their mother's belongings. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Old clothes, faded books, and a few trinkets. But at the bottom of the wardrobe, tucked behind a stack of blankets, the child's hand brushed against something hard and smooth. They pulled it out, a small, locked wooden box. Heart pounding, the child tried to open the box, but it wouldn't budge. They looked around, searching for anything that could help, when they spotted a bobby pin on the dresser. They had seen Aunt Simi pick locks with hairpins before, so they tried the same trick. After a few attempts, the lock clicked open. Inside the box was a single letter, folded and sealed with a smudged red wax stamp. The handwriting on the envelope looked hurried, almost as if their mother had written it in a rush. The child's hands trembled as they broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The letter read, "My beloved child, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you. I left because of secrets buried deep within our family. There are things I cannot speak of, things I have kept hidden to protect you. The man in the photo, he was once a part of my life, a part I thought I could leave behind. But he returned, and with him came dangers I could not shield you from. I left to keep you safe, but if you found this letter, it means you're ready to know the truth. Trust no one, not even those who seem closest. The truth is buried in the old well by the edge of the village. Seek it only if you're ready to face what you find." The letter ended abruptly, with no signature, but the child knew it was from their mother. Tears welled up in their eyes, mixing fear with the flickering hope that they might finally understand her decision. The old well, a place no one went anymore. It was said to be cursed, a place where strange things had happened in the past. But the child felt a fierce determination growing inside. If their mother had left the answer there, then they would find it, no matter the risk. They slipped the letter into their pocket, their pulse quickening. Tomorrow night they would go to the well alone. But as they turned to leave the room, a shadow passed by the door. Aunt Simi stood there, her face unreadable, her gaze fixed on the open box in the child's hands. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her voice tense. For a brief moment, the child considered hiding the letter, pretending they had found nothing. But something in Aunt Simi's eyes told them that she knew more than she let on. And maybe, just maybe, she was part of the secret their mother had hidden. The letter weighed heavily in the child's pocket, like a stone that kept their mother's voice close. That night, they could barely sleep, their mind racing with questions. Who was the man in the photograph? Why did their mother hide a letter warning them to trust no one? And what dark secret could be hidden in the old well? The following night, as the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the village, the child slipped out of the house. They walked through the shadows, guided only by the sound of crickets and the faint rustling of the wind. The path to the well was narrow, and as the trees closed in around them, the child felt a chill settle over their shoulders. Each step brought a deeper ache in their chest, a longing for the mother they once knew, and a fear of the truth they were about to uncover. The old well stood alone at the edge of the village, half hidden by thick ivy and surrounded by uneven stones. No one dared come here, not since the stories began to spread of villagers hearing whispers coming from its depths. They were whispers that begged to be forgotten, or so they said. The child took a deep breath and stepped closer. The well's stone edges were cold to the touch, and the scent of damp earth wafted up, filling their lungs with a strange mix of fear and hope. Carefully, they leaned over, peering down into the dark, silent pit. "Mom," they whispered, their voice barely audible. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, and the child felt a sting of disappointment. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding, a cruel joke, or a mistake. But just as they were about to turn away, something caught their eye. Tucked into a small crevice near the bottom of the well's stones, barely visible, was a piece of cloth. The child quickly reached down, pulling at it. It was a faded red scarf, the same one their mother had worn on the day she disappeared. A sob caught in the child's throat. Clutching the scarf, they felt closer to her than they had in weeks, as if she were right beside them. Suddenly, the shadows around the well seemed alive, thickening as if someone or something was watching. In that moment, they heard it, a faint voice, a whisper echoing up from the well's depths. "I'm sorry, I couldn't stay. I did it to protect you." It was their mother's voice, fragile and distant, like an echo from another world. Tears filled the child's eyes, and they reached down into the darkness as if hoping to pull her back. But the voice faded, leaving only silence and the empty darkness below. A cold shiver ran through them. As they clutched the scarf, they noticed something odd, a faint, strange scent on the fabric. It wasn't their mother's usual floral perfume, but something harsher, unfamiliar. Fear washed over them. Who had last touched this scarf? Was it their mother? Or the man in the photograph? They stumbled back, heart racing, when they heard footsteps on the path. The child's head whipped around, and there, emerging from the shadows, was Aunt Simi. Her face was pale, her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene, the scarf, the well, and the tear-streaked face of the child. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly. The child held the scarf close, unwilling to let it go. "I want to know what happened to my mother. She's here." I heard her voice. Aunt Simi's face softened for a brief moment, but then a hardness returned to her eyes. "Come home," she said firmly, reaching out to take the child's hand. "This place isn't safe. Some things are better left buried." But the child yanked their hand away, defiance filling their chest. "You're hiding something. Why won't you tell me the truth?" Aunt Simi sighed, her shoulders slumping, and for a brief second, the child saw a glimmer of sadness in her eyes. "Your mother made choices, sacrifices that you can't understand yet. She did what she did to protect you from a danger you'll never need to face if you let it go." Tears streamed down the child's face as they clutched the scarf tighter, feeling the lingering warmth of their mother's love and her sorrow. They wanted to believe Aunt Simi, to let the mystery end here, but deep down, they knew they couldn't stop. Not now. "Then why did she leave me?" they cried, their voice echoing through the silent trees. Aunt Simi didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the child with a deep sadness, a sadness that spoke of secrets too heavy to bear alone. Without another word, she turned and started back down the path, leaving the child alone with the night, the well, and the ghostly echoes of a mother's love and sacrifice. Back at home, the child lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The scarf was still clutched in their hands, and its strange scent lingered, filling the room with a feeling they couldn't shake, like something unfinished, a piece of the puzzle just out of reach. The next day, the child decided to confront Aunt Simi once and for all. After breakfast, they watched her go about her chores, waiting until she was alone. When she went into the kitchen, they followed, gripping the scarf tightly, determined to get the answers they deserved. "Aunt Simi," the child began, voice steady, "you have to tell me the truth. I found the scarf at the well, and I heard her voice. I know she's still here somehow. Please, just tell me why she left." Aunt Simi froze, her hands stilling over the dishes. She didn't turn to face the child, but the stiffness in her shoulders betrayed the emotions she was holding back. After a long silence, she took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice low and somber. "There are things about your mother you don't know, child, things she kept hidden for your sake. But now, I suppose it's time you understood." Aunt Simi turned, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to weigh down her whole body. She gestured for the child to sit down at the kitchen table, then took a seat across from them. "Your mother and I grew up in this village," she began, her voice soft and distant. "We were happy for the most part. But when she was just a little older than you, she met a man, a stranger who came to the village one day, claiming to be passing through. He was charming, mysterious, and your mother, well, she fell in love with him." The child's heart raced. This was the man in the photograph, the stranger who had somehow led to their mother's disappearance. But there was something unusual about him, Aunt Simi continued, choosing her words carefully. He had a strange effect on people. They'd become unsettled around him, uneasy. Some said he had powers. Your mother refused to believe it. She thought he was just misunderstood. Aunt Simi's gaze turned distant, her hands clasped tightly on the table. They were together for a time, but soon, strange things began to happen in the village. Crops would fail, animals would fall sick, and some villagers, well, they started disappearing. The child shivered, the weight of Aunt Simi's words pressing down on them. What did he do? Aunt Simi shook her head. No one knows for sure. But your mother, she grew frightened. She tried to leave him, but he didn't take it well. She fled one night, hoping to escape him. That was when she met your father, a kind man who took her in, loved her, and tried to give her a new life. She thought she was safe, that the stranger had given up. But he didn't, the child whispered, their voice barely audible. Aunt Simi nodded slowly. No, he came back. He found her, even after all those years, and he left her with a choice, a terrible choice. She could stay, risk exposing you to whatever curse followed him, or she could leave, hoping that by doing so she would finally keep you safe. The child's heart broke as Aunt Simi's words sank in. Their mother hadn't left because she didn't love them. She had left to protect them from something unimaginable. Tears filled their eyes, and they clutched the scarf tighter. The scent, a painful reminder of the mother who had sacrificed so much for them. "But why didn't she tell me?" the child asked, their voice choked with emotion. "Why didn't she tell me any of this?" "She wanted you to have a chance at a normal life," Aunt Simi said softly. "If you knew the truth, you'd spend every day looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to come back. She couldn't bear to put that weight on you." Silence fell between them, thick with unspoken pain. The child looked down at the scarf, feeling the warmth of their mother's love and the coldness of her absence all at once. They understood now, but the ache in their heart was sharper than ever. "What do I do now?" they asked, voice trembling. Aunt Simi placed a comforting hand on their shoulder. "You live. You honor her sacrifice by living the life she wanted for you. She gave everything so you could be free of him. Don't let her sacrifice be in vain." The child nodded, though their heart was heavy. They had the answers now, but it didn't make the loss any easier. As they sat there holding the scarf close, they whispered a silent promise to their mother, a promise to live, to be strong, and to remember the love she'd left behind. Days passed, but the child couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unresolved. Knowing the truth brought them a measure of peace, but it also left them haunted. Their mother's sacrifice had saved them from the stranger's curse. But what if he wasn't truly gone? One evening, as the village was quieting down for the night, a strange chill swept over the air. The child, unable to sleep, stood by the window, staring into the dark. The village seemed different somehow, as if a shadow had settled over it, darkening the moonlit streets and twisting the trees into sinister shapes. Then, in the distance, they saw him. The figure stood at the edge of the village, barely visible in the darkness, but there was no mistaking the strange presence about him. It was the man from the photograph, the stranger from Aunt Simi's story, the one their mother had feared. He was back. A sick feeling settled in the child's stomach. Heart pounding, they backed away from the window and ran to Aunt Simi's room, shaking her awake. "Aunt Simi, he's here, the man from the photograph. He's come back." Aunt Simi's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. She quickly sat up, pulling the child close. "Are you sure?" she whispered. The child nodded, barely able to breathe. "He's standing at the edge of the village, watching." Aunt Simi took a deep breath, composing herself. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady but tense. "He can't hurt you, not unless you let him. He thrives on fear and darkness, but your mother's love, it's stronger than anything he can bring. Do you understand?" The child nodded, though their hands were trembling. Aunt Simi held them tighter. "You have to be brave. If he sees that you're afraid, he'll only grow stronger. But if you hold on to your mother's love, he can't touch you." Aunt Simi took out a small locket and placed it around the child's neck. Inside was a tiny photograph of their mother, smiling, radiant with love and warmth. The child clutched it tightly, feeling a surge of strength flood their chest. "I need you to go outside and face him," Aunt Simi said softly. "Show him that you're not afraid. Show him that he can't control you. I'll be right behind you." With trembling steps, the child made their way outside, guided by Aunt Simi's reassuring presence. They walked down the path, the locket warm in their hand, until they reached the edge of the village. The stranger was still there, his dark, piercing eyes watching them with a strange, unsettling intensity. But this time, the child felt different. They stood taller, holding on to the warmth of their mother's memory and the love she had left behind. They could almost hear her voice, steady and strong, whispering, "I'm with you. I always will be." The stranger took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. But the child stood firm, refusing to back down. They held up the locket, showing him the picture of their mother, a defiant glint in their eyes. "She left because of you," the child said, their voice steady and clear. "But she's not afraid anymore, and neither am I." The stranger's face twisted, anger flashing in his eyes, but he seemed weaker somehow. The child realized that he wasn't as powerful as he seemed. He had thrived on fear, on darkness, but here, facing the strength of a mother's love, he was losing his hold. With one last look of defiance, the child stepped forward, still clutching the locket, and whispered, "You don't belong here. Leave and never come back." A strange, eerie silence filled the air, and for a moment, it seemed as if time itself had stopped. Then, without another word, the stranger turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the village and the child standing alone in the quiet, victorious. The child felt a weight lift from their heart, a peace settling over them as they looked down at the locket in their hand. Their mother's love had protected them, giving them the strength to face the darkness. And now, for the first time, they felt truly safe. Aunt Simi came to their side, wrapping her arms around them. "You did it," she whispered, her voice full of pride and relief. Together, they stood under the night sky, knowing that the stranger would never return and that the love left behind would always be there, a silent, powerful shield against whatever darkness the world might bring.